or whatever it may be. So there's a huge change coming. And this is an important battle to face, is our rights as humans in this world. And I think it also leads us into identification. I've talked a lot about this. I think it's incredibly important that we have digital identification and that we can keep it private, but we're provable who we are and that we have the credentials we say we have. And I think that is going to be increasingly important in a world driven by AI, where you can make any image instantaneously in huge quantities for any different type of person. And so we don't know what's real and what's fake. We could have Joe Biden saying, I'm going to nuke Russia tomorrow in a CNN video. And you can do that very soon just by text to video and it'll create the video. Okay, that's a huge problem coming up to the US election. I mean, imagine how other sovereign states could use this. And we don't know what is real and what's not. And we don't know who we're dealing with online. Are we dealing with AI? Are we dealing with bots? Are we dealing with real people? And digital verification of our identity, I think, is going to become increasingly important. Now, governments will get involved in it, and there's nothing we can do about that. And you will have your government ID, much like you have your passport. And guess what? Governments know everything about what's in your bank account, and Google knows everything about you. So you actually have no privacy, even though you think you do. But we can get our privacy back, and we can use it to log in around the web and have different manifestations of ourselves. I might want to be somebody different on Reddit than I am on Twitter, than I am on Real Vision, for example. And the ways of doing that to prove that I'm actually a real person or I'm the same person without saying who I am. Or maybe I don't want to prove I'm the same person, but I give a certain layer of the information away. So anyway, that's digital ID, which is a massive, massive part of all of this. The other thing that we're seeing is business models around capital and involvement. So I think people like Ben Mesrich and Dan Sickles, both filmmakers, have done really interesting things around what you can do with movies and books and other stuff like that, is you can essentially crowdfund it by getting people to buy NFTs that involve in it that may get some stream of payments or participation in the future success of that project. It's kind of like Yuga Labs. But if I'm seeing award-winning filmmakers and authors doing it, okay, that's really interesting. Ben Mesrich's bigger idea is to create a platform for authors, much like Amazon's done with the ability to self-publish. But imagine if you can get paid better, you keep your ownership rights, Amazon doesn't take a larger share, and you can get a community behind it, etc. Okay, that becomes really interesting. The 1,000 true fans approach is much easier to do once you have Web3 enabled access. So I think that's disrupting the media industry. I think we'll see NFTs become very large in the sports industry in due course. Digital collectibles have always been a large part of that industry, and it's only going to get larger. Brand loyalty and brands. I mean, I've built a whole business around this called Science Magic Studios, which I co-founded. I'm not involved in running it, but Tarek, who is the president of Science Magic Studios, he broke new ground as well, because he realized that there was something called phygital, where basically you could have digital manifestation of physical goods, which is Adidas trainers. And how could you then partner with other Web3 communities? How can you build a community around this? I mean, people are already trading Nike trainers and Adidas trainers. So why not give them digital things to trade as well? Okay, that's a really interesting concept. And we've seen people like Balenciaga doing similar in the fashion industry, and Dolce & Gabbana and others. The fashion people are coming into this space too, and they're realizing that, well, if I want to wear something online as part of my digital identity, why would I not have a Gucci thing if Gucci is one of the brands that I like? It also could be digitally native ones that have never had physical product. All of these are possible. There's the interaction where you get the NFT and it gives you the physical, and Dolce & Gabbana have done that too. We've seen the crossover with Tiffany as well. We've seen so many developments happening all at the same time using this NFT technology. It's fascinating to see. This is this applications layer, the consumer layer, the broad layer, and it's still pretty early days. But I think it's much bigger than all of that too. I think Web3 is an incredibly powerful business model. It's probably the most powerful business model I've ever seen. And that goes back to network effects. So if you remember, I've talked a lot about the network effects, Metcalfe's law of owning cryptocurrencies. Why does it work so much? Because it's behavioral economics 101. If you have incentivization to help promote something, you will do so. And if the better it goes, the more you get, then even better. So, if you're a salesman, you get paid to sell something, a car, but you don't get paid the upside of Tesla over time growing as a company. You have to be a shareholder for that. So with Facebook, the shareholders got rich because they developed an incredibly important network, one of the biggest networks on Earth. So that meta network is Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. Okay. So we got to use the utility of these platforms. We can connect with friends and do all the things that we want to on their network. We can advertise our businesses. We can do all sorts, communicate with everybody. Okay, great. And then they monetized us with advertising. So they took the lion's share of the revenue and the shareholders got rich and we didn't. Okay, I mean, that's fine. It's a business. They can do what they want. But this new model, imagine if everybody who got onto Facebook in the early days or into WhatsApp got given shares. then imagine how fast the adoption would have been and how broad it would have been and what it would have meant. It could have been an enormously valuable network, even more so than the $1 trillion or whatever it did at peak after prior to the big sell-off it's just had. What happens if Google had a token? What would that mean? Now, that's what's going on with NFTs. They're allowing you to participate in these other networks. Just because some have 10,000 doesn't mean they can't have 1 million NFTs. And as people like Solana roll out new technologies to allow it, we'll see much more scaled NFTs, Polygon too. And I think that becomes really interesting in those network states ideas, that we can do really, really big things with all of this. So once we start thinking about that, we realize that as the technology gets cheaper and more efficient to create NFTs at scale, we start opening up the world of contracts themselves. The Web3 business model now means that your customers are part owners of your business in a certain respect. It's not an ownership like a share, but it's a participation of the network, and they get utility for doing that. So that means you now have a direct connection with your customer, much like the music artist or the visual artist has by selling NFTs. They now have a direct connection with their audience, and therefore they can capture more of a lion's share of the revenues without paying third parties, be it Ticketmaster or be it Live Nation, or be it Google or Facebook or advertising agencies or high frequency traders in the advertising markets, and all of these other people that take about 80% of the economics. People who design the contracts, the lawyers, the accountants, all of that stuff can all go away. So it becomes this very powerful relationship. You have a direct relationship with your community, which is the new word for marketing, because you don't have customers anymore because they're actually part of your business. You need to get your head around that. We've been like that for a long time at Real Vision. It's a very natural state for us. Community is what we truly believe in, and that means everybody has to participate and help each other in growing it to build out the utility for everybody else. So the community element of Web3 is groundbreaking for marketers, because suddenly you're not just selling to people, you're bringing them to join you in your product mission. And I think we're going to see enormous changes in how the world works. And what you're doing is you're making two things a reality. One is creating culture as an asset class. You can invest in culture. Like I've talked about this at length. What is the cultural value of Disney? It's probably a couple of $1 trillion. It's probably the biggest brand in the world, maybe of all time. I don't know, but certainly culturally relevant brand. Coca-Cola may have been culturally relevant in the past, but it's less so now. While Disney is still culturally relevant to billions of people around the world. Okay, to have a part of that ecosystem, that's valuable. So culture becomes an asset. The same with clothing, same with music, same with sports, same with all of this. It's culture, culture, culture. Web3 enables culture, which is why Rec Guy and all of these things are cultural, and that's my Rec Guy behind me, are all cultural phenomena, as well as digital phenomena and art phenomena and all of the other things, technology. And the other element outside of culture is that these things are intangibles, brand and culture. What that means is they don't appear on your balance sheet. They don't have real value for you because you can't measure them. So you just put some fake number there. It doesn't mean anything, and people kind of ignore it. But when you tokenize it, it has a real value on your balance sheet. So that makes companies much more valuable. So it unlocks hidden value in the system, which is an extraordinary thing. It just accrues. So that is another big unlock for brands and anybody else. You get to monetize your culture, monetize your brand, and share it with your community. And that creates network effects that makes these things grow much, much faster. And we will see some shockingly fast brands. Go back to the example of Yuga. Yuga was probably the fastest appreciation of value for any company or project in history. I don't know. In the first year and a half, it did something like 250,000%. I mean, simply mind-boggling. And I think we'll see things like some of these new AI open source networks, maybe tokenize the network there, where you can participate in the network, you pay with the tokens to use the network, use the data, and maybe if you supply data to the network, you can get paid in tokens too. And that means society at large can participate in these giant networks. Now, that's probably more of a